Hi everyone, welcome to Unsafe Space. You're watching Dangerous Talks with me, Carter Laren. This is a series we do every Wednesday evening. Well, most Wednesday evenings. We're dedicated to the application of reason and individualist ethics. These are two superpowered ideas that we inherited from Enlightenment thinkers, ideas that made civilization, modern civilization, better than any civilization that ever came before it. No matter what you think about where we are right now, if you objectively look at it, pretty damn good compared to the rest of human history. And these are ideas that much of the West has spent, I don't know, over a century vilifying, corrupting, undermining, as we are collectively on this suicidal binge of collectivism and rationality and psychological dysfunction. So we're here to defend those ideas. We're here to move humanity forward, not in the way that progressives mean it. They're so good at naming stuff. Progressivism sounds so great, right? But we want to move humanity forward, not in that way. The progressives, when they say it, they mean they want to build a massive administrative state to control you. We actually want to move it forward here through the recognition of individual rights, through political liberty, and a commitment to reason as every individual's primary means of survival. So that's what this show is about. There you have it. Welcome to people in chat. Hey, G-Man. G-Man just scrolls in. He's like, what's going on? Hey, G-Man. I sound like I'm streaming from the bottom of a well. You know, Beverly didn't show up to actually help me check my levels today. So, what am I going to do? I don't know. Can you not hear me? Does it sound really bad? All right, people are saying it's bad, lots of noise and low tone. All right, well, let's see if we can adjust it. We'll do this in real time. No, that's not why I asked if anyone works in tech, man. Is this better or worse or the same? Someone tell me, better, worse, the same in chat. I don't want to have to start the show over, but I guess I could. We can just take a moment and I can try and start again. Someone in chat tell me if this is better, worse, or the same. All right, if it's the same, I'm going to, I'm going to play. I'll give you something to look at while I restart my camera stuff. Let's see if I can find something you guys can look at. How about I don't know. Here, we'll watch Kamala Harris for just a moment.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree.
Your hamburger comes with a dose of misogyny. Your hamburger comes with a dose of misogyny.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
All right, there were some clips. Is that better? Yeah, her sound is clear. Great. We need to really understand what Kamala Harris is saying. Is this sound better or is this sound the same? Because I'm not sure what I do after this. Mm-hmm. She does seem to be throwing it intentionally lately. I'll fight you naked. It's the same. You got to be kidding me. All right. I'm the face, but not the brains. I'm actually the brains. I'm not the good face, so you can blame me for this too. I sound muffled. Why would I sound muffled? All right. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just leave this screen up for a minute while I do some fiddling, and I apologize for that. But we'll leave we'll leave you with some faith. Please tell me this is better, because I just literally rebooted the computer doing the sound. I'm controlling it from a different computer. So tell me, guys, is this better or is it the same? If it's the same, it's failed. It's still just as bad. Are you saying it's still just as bad? It's way worse. You gotta be kidding me.
Is this any different?
The microphone's connected. The microphone's connected. I got all this, plug it in. That stuff's all working. I'm speaking to the mic and seeing it move. Is this better? Someone said this is much worse. Now I'm underwater. I'm not sure what to do because I don't want to do a show like this. Okay, guys, this is shittier camera, and it was echoing, but it shouldn't be echoing anymore. This is a shittier camera, and it's a shittier mic, but it might be working. Can you hear me? All right, we'll do this. So by the way, just the nice mic, this one, I've now unplugged. The nice camera's gone, and we're using a crappy little. What a mess to start. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. No different than Monday when we did narrative dissonance. I literally just turned the computer back on, and here we are. All right. If you guys can hear me better, we'll start with this. Anyway, maybe I'll just take it from the top. You know what? I know it's annoying. I'm going to take it from the top. The reason I'm going to take it from the top is I want to be able to splice all this out when we share it elsewhere and for audio. So welcome to Unsafe Space. You're watching Dangerous Talks with me, Carter Laren. This is a series we do Wednesday evening, mostly every Wednesday evening, dedicated to the application of reason in individualist ethics. These are two really, really powerful, important ideas that were passed down to us from Enlightenment thinkers. They've made modern civilization leaps and bounds better than any civilization before it. And the West has spent most of the last few decades, or probably over a century, vilifying, undermining, castigating, blaming, corrupting these ideas. We're kind of on a suicide mission as a culture, and that's largely fueled by collectivism, irrationality, psychological dysfunction. And on this show, what we like to do is defend those important ideas, the important ideas of the Enlightenment, move humanity forward. As I said before, not the way that progressives mean it. Progressivism sounds really good, but they don't actually mean progress. What they mean is they would like to build a massive administrative state to control you. I'd actually like to move forward, actually forward, which means proper recognition of individual rights and political liberty, commitment to political liberty, a commitment to reason as our primary means for survival as individuals. Okay, So on today's agenda, mostly I'm going to talk about what kind of society I think we need to focus on building in order to flourish. But before that, I'm going to do a quick comment on Trump and FBI stuff because it's in the news. People have been asking about it a lot. And then after I talk about the main topic, I'm going to circle back and talk about reason and intuition, because that's and hearing some discussions about that. And then I'm going to talk about argumentation a little bit. Hopefully we can all help improve our own arguments. So, by the way, I did not put this poll up in chat, which the poll is, do you work in tech? I didn't put it up because I need tech help, but maybe I should have. So maybe I'll reach out to those of you who answered yes, let me know, and I'll reach out to you afterwards. Ironically, I worked in tech for decades. So, okay. By the way, don't forget to make sure you're subscribed. On YouTube really likes to unsubscribe people, but everywhere, make sure you subscribe, Rumble, Odyssey, everywhere else. And please share this content. Maybe skip the first several minutes of this particular episode, but share this content. Lots of the topics on this show in particular are evergreen topics. So if you're interested in something that you think I should have discussed, or there's context that you feel like you're missing, you might want to go through the Dangerous Thoughts playlist on YouTube and see if it's been covered already. Okay, so really quickly on the Trump stuff. I don't actually want to comment too much on what's going on, other than to give a little bit of a background on national security and handling of classified information and that kind of stuff, because I think there's a lot of things are muddled on both sides of the aisle. I see a lot of muddling, and it is confusing and complex. It's more confusing than it ought to be. It's not super straightforward. So for those of you who don't know, I did when I was a young lad, much better looking young lad. I did have a top secret clearance, and I did have SCI, which is a special compartmentalized clearance, which is as deep as you can go. And so I'm going to talk based on that experience, and trying to explain how some of this stuff works. There's a separate thing, though, other than classification systems. People like to get excited about classification, right? There's confidential, secret, top secret, and then compartmentalized. In addition to the classification system, there was an Espionage Act. I think it was in 1917 or something. It's old, and I think it was last updated in the 50s or something, extensively. So it's still, even the updates are old. So the classification system, so the Espionage Act predates this classification system completely. The classification system is part of the executive office. It's executive branch function. So it's implemented through executive orders. So presidents make the ultimate determination on classification of materials. They can decide whether something is secret or unclassified or whatever. I guess if they tried to declassify the nuclear code, someone might complain, but theoretically they can. Usually the president directs the classifying agency to do the declassification, but not always. Sometimes presidents feel like there's a need to just do it themselves. I think Bush declassified some stuff about Bruce prior to 9/11 that he had been given. He just did it. He didn't ask anyone. But the Espionage Act, because it predates the classification system, is not about the classification system at all. And it's got really vague, broad, and sometimes ambiguous language in it. And it covers information related to national security, which, I mean, that could be Joe Biden's breakfast cereal, right? I don't know what's related to that. Lots of things are related to. It's such, I mean, that kind of language, if you've ever done contract law, and if you're on a side that wants to be able to have really broad reaching language, you use language related to blah blah blah, and it's everything's related to everything. And if you're on the other side that wants it to be narrow, you recognize that kind of stuff in contract negotiations, and you're no, related to is too broad. But the Espionage Act uses that kind of a language. It's wildly broad. It's used against whistleblowers a lot. It was used against Chelsea Manning. Used against Edward Snowden, used against Julian Assange. And like I said, it has nothing to do with whether information is classified or not. So about this stuff and you're like, well, Trump declassified this or this happened or blah, blah, blah. You got to understand the laws that they're using is often the Espionage Act. They're not really going after classification stuff because they're two separate. And like everything in government, it's like bloated and confusing and, can be interpreted however you want and perfect for administrators who want to use it however they want to use it. Hillary, the document had a C on it. I don't know. This is Demon Slayer in chat. So yeah, right. Hillary set up a server in her house because, she could. No one cared. It's just an email. Stop talking about the emails. They're just emails. I'm sure the Secretary of State didn't have any information that was related to national security. Anyway, let's not get into that. So I don't want to comment too much on Trump's particular situation for a couple of reasons. One is I'm actually not interested enough to follow it very closely. I'm kind of tired of Trump, frankly. I think we knew he was a populist. We knew he wasn't principled, but I hope that he would actually do some things that he just didn't do. So I don't really care about Trump anymore. I get that he is the bull in the china shop, but he seemed to be a much less effective bull than I wished he was. And also, I just basically don't trust any of the parties involved to be telling the truth. Like, no one involved in this entire thing. I don't trust any of their stories. So I wouldn't, just to be clear, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump kept documents that he shouldn't have just because he felt like he was entitled to them. I wouldn't be surprised if other presidents normally do the same thing, no matter what they claim. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump kept documents because he thought some information would protect him from, deep state stuff and he was being targeted and he was going to use it as leverage. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump kept documents just because he was sloppy. On the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised if the GSA, the Government Services Administration, mistakenly sent documents to Mar-a-Lago that they shouldn't have. I also wouldn't be surprised if it turned out the GSA intentionally sent the documents to Mar-a-Lago to entrap Trump. I wouldn't be surprised if the Justice Department has never cared about this with respect to any other president, but they're going after Trump specifically because of TDS. All that stuff wouldn't surprise me. I will say what would surprise me. I would be surprised if Trump was plotting something nefarious involving international espionage. And here's why, completely apart from his character. I don't want to make any character judgments. Apart from all of that, I would be surprised. And here's why. If I were going to smuggle secrets out of the White House, or any, like a SCIF or any secure area, and I had like a plan to use these. I was going to, sell them or trade them or whatever. I wouldn't have paper copies lying around in 15 different cardboard boxes. Yesterday on Amazon, I bought a $40 thumb drive that has 2 terabytes on it. Now, it's an unusually low price, but still, I would just have a $40 thumb drive. I would have everything on it. It would be encrypted. Maybe I'd also store that encrypted data in the cloud somewhere. Only I would have the key. The end. That would be my smuggling operation. There might be some more technical stuff I'd need to do to get around people noticing I was doing that, but that's the essence of what the operation would be. No one seizes that information without my permission because I have the key. I am the only one who has the key. I can travel anywhere in the world with this information and access it if I stick it online encrypted somewhere stick it in a file somewhere on a torrent. Even in the 1960s, James Bond used a microdot, not boxes of paper. So this paper documents at the bottom of cardboard boxes bullshit sounds to me like a bad spy drama written by Ralphie from A Christmas Story. It doesn't pass the smell test to me. That's all I'm going to say about this entire thing. All right. G-Man's got a super chat, so let's pull it up. Yes, I know I'm technically incompetent. Everything's changed now, though. So here we go. Where is it? G-Man says, every U.S. president should go directly to jail after leaving office. Let the elites fight amongst themselves for a while. It's their turn. You know what? How about, G-Man, every president goes directly to jail as soon as they're elected? I think that would be good. All right, let's talk about the main topic for tonight. My title on my notes here says homesteading versus nuclear fusion. It's not really an accurate thing. I think the title of the show was something about Randy Weaver versus George Jetson. I want to talk about homesteading as a response to the decaying culture in the United States. And I'm defining homesteading kind of loosely as move to the country, grow your own food, become self-sufficient. Like that's a thing. You see Owen Benjamin doing that. You see a lot of people talking about that. It's a thing, especially in the conservative movement, some libertarians. It's kind of this romanticized little house on the prairie thing. G-Man says I was talking about pre-crime when I wanted to. No, I mean, just getting elected probably is enough. Anyway, so that's my loose definition of homesteading. And I want to, before I jump into it, there's two caveats. Personally, I actually love a more rural life. Many aspects of that lifestyle are attractive to me personally. Not so into having to maintain a vegetable garden, but other stuff I like. The second point I want to make is self-sufficient, and I'll expand on this later, but self-sufficient is a self-delusion. Almost no one is actually willing to live the life that an actual self-sufficient lifestyle would entail. I saw a few weeks ago, I saw a friend who, he and his dad, I don't know the name of this group they're in, but they do this thing where they live as if it's 1850 or something for like a week at a time. I don't think they go much longer than that, maybe 2 weeks, but not much longer than that. And it's harsh, and they do it because they like it and they think it's fun and it's a challenge. But they have to make their own clothes and like it's not easy. It's tough. It's tough to live as if, and that was 1850. That wasn't that long ago. And that that can be fun. It's fun for them for a short period of time. Even then, I don't think it's fun for most people. I think if most of you, even I said, hey, want to go live like it's 1850 for a couple weeks, like actually live like that, I think you'd probably say no. And even this guy, he's in IT during the normal times. When he's not living like it's 1850, he's working in IT. And it's worth taking a moment to think about what you rely on, even if you are homesteading in 2022. And it's just some of the things you're relying on. Basic tools, like just tools to do your gardening or anything, right? Those tools require an entire mining industry, an entire fossil fuel industry, advanced machinery, everything. Your medical care. I don't know too many people that are homesteading that are like, yeah, I'll take care of my own medical care. We're going to march through the woods and find some herbs and crush them up. And if I get a toothache, I might die, right? So the entire medical industry and everything that entails, you're relying on that. Your shelter and all of its contents, the entire industry's there. And a lot of these homesteaders talk about it on the internet. So you're not only are you relying on the physical infrastructure of the internet, which includes advanced physics and chemical engineering and electrical engineering and satellite technology and etc. Just to do the homesteading, a lot of people are like, they're relying on the knowledge base of the entire world to look up stuff that they need to look up. So homesteading, if you like it, great, have at it. Like, do the homesteading thing. But don't pretend it's actual, like, a strategy to deal with societal decay. If it is your strategy to deal with the decay of society, I think it's a horribly pessimistic and apocalyptic view that's doomed to failure. On the thumbnail for this show today has a picture of Weaver, who was the guy at Ruby Ridge. Now, he died in May of this year. He died this year. But of course, he lost his wife and kid. Homesteading because the FBI and actually the U.S. Marshals. So the idea that you could even be left alone is probably not true. But this kind of, I need to go survive on my own thing.
if society collapses, we'll survive on our own in the woods, or just in the country. The level of survival you're talking about is something so primitive you probably couldn't even comprehend it. So as things like your refrigerator or your furnace or your tractor or your fence or your boots or your shovel or your teeth break or deteriorate or beyond repair or whatever, you start to slide into not just a pre-industrial society, but pre-Bronze Age. So saying that your plan to wait out the cultural battle, your plan to get freedom to survive involves this acceptance of a massive defeat, that you're going to become a caveman for a couple of generations. It's not the best strategy. If you really think the world is going to collapse that severely, if you seriously think it's going to come to the point where you need to rely on being all by yourself with no electricity, and like you're going to be churning butter or whatever the hell, because like if that's your thing, if you think that's what it's going to come to, your best strategy is actually to acquire massive wealth. You'd be a billionaire, because no matter what happens, Elon Musk will be fine. Massive wealth gives you mobility, gives you access. You can move, you can leave, you can hide, you can afford things. Like, if you really think that's what's going to happen, massive wealth is your answer, not going to the country and unplugging. And again, this is someone who I like the country. JB says, as people die off, there will be a huge supply of advanced materials. One of the dumbest parts of Walking Dead is ammo shortage. There will be a supply, but I think you are overestimating how much inventory is all that you need, right? And where is it, right? So yeah, I mean, you could probably have enough ammo for the rest of your life. That's probably true. But if your car breaks down, you're not going to have gasoline, by the way. Gasoline doesn't last. Diesel does, but something breaks on that thing. I mean, maybe there's a part somewhere in a shop sitting around, but you have to know where it is, and it's not going to get manufactured and shipped to you, right? So it's not that easy. And I'm thinking about this in particular because, first of all, we read Fossil Future recently by Alex Epstein, which is a great reminder of how awesome technology is and how much we rely on it. But also I was talking to my wife about the ideal life that we wanted, right? It's a good thing to do, by the way, with your spouse once in a while. Like, hey, what are our goals? What could we want? What do we want? If we could do anything, what would it be, right? Even if you can't do anything. We can't do what we want yet, but we thought, well, we want to live in the country. We want a rural life because we value exposure to nature. It gives you an appreciation for the comforts of modern life. It exposes a lot that is hidden in modern society, like how difficult it is to obtain food, and you're exposed to death of livestock or whatever. And like, you're exposed to the harsher elements, and you see what nature's really like. So there's a lot to learn there if you're raising kids. But we also kind of value the urban life because we want exposure to the massive cooperation and advancement of humans, the deep study of things, building complex technology, entrepreneurship, even art and culture. Like, the variety there is valuable. And you don't get those things by yourself on a ranch in the middle of Wyoming. Now, personally, we lean more towards a rural existence with maybe, intentional frequent exposure to the city. So like a ranch in the country, and I don't know, would have a condo in somewhere we visit for a few months a year, something like that, right, in the city. So that's for us. Everyone's going to have their own thing. But that thought, that discussion got me thinking about this community in particular. And I was thinking, if we're the representatives of Enlightenment values, specifically the values of reason and individualism, political freedom, if that's how we think of ourselves, which I think many of you do, then if that's who we are, if we're representing those values, the entire industrial revolution and all modern technology, that's ours. and I don't mean it's our birthright. I'm not saying like seize the means of production. I just mean we're the stewards of it. It's ours. We're the ones who are the intellectual heirs of that, because we're the ones who are supporting the ideas necessary for that to happen, right? It's only possible to have a modern, advanced society through the ideas that we promote and defend. And the way forward in the culture war is not to cede technology and science to the destroyers and to be like, well, I'm going to check out and go live on a ranch. You guys have AI. That's not going to go well, right? That's a recipe for like a dystopian dark ages. You give the destroyers of humanity are in charge, but they're armed with tech, and the defenders of humanity are busy tending our vegetable gardens. I hate vegetable gardens, if you can't tell. So look, I don't think the U.S. in its current political configuration can be saved. I've said that before. But also, even if it could be saved, that's a secondary goal for me. What made the United States great was not these 50 states in this particular land. It certainly wasn't this particular political configuration. We could argue that, well, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, those are political documents, they did make America special. But now we're not really all that different from most of Europe, and we're moving closer towards Europe every day politically. We just signed into law. We've got 87,000 new IRS agents coming our way. Jackboots disguised as accountants, right? If the spirit of the founding fathers were alive, those people would be tarred and feathered and driven out of town. What made the U.S. superior, I'm using that word intentionally because I think it was superior. What made the U.S. superior was its ideas, right? Specifically, individual rights, priority to government before government, not something government grants you, but something government is obligated morally to recognize. The idea of governments, instituted with the goal of protecting those rights, which is by definition a non-intrusive government, probably tiny. At the federal level, ought to be quite powerless. All right, states, the U.S., the way it's configured, states might be different, and we all know the U.S. didn't implement those ideas fully. We didn't implement them consistently. But we, and I mean this community, like literally, we can. Those of us who understand those ideas and are committed to them, we can implement them consistently. We're not starting from scratch. I'm not saying that we could achieve perfection, but we know what's the more moral path is. We know what works in the long run, which by the same thing is, by the way, is the same thing as what's moral. And that's a system based on the preservation of individual sovereignty, not based on the preservation of state power. So I think, we as a community need to, loudly and in every area of our lives, reject this concept of public good, first of all. I'm so tired of hearing public good. I hear it all the time. Public good is an anti-concept. I've said this over and over again. I feel like a broken record, but it still has to be said. It's an anti-concept. It undermines the concept of good. It's neither public nor good. Right? Let's look at the word public. What does public mean? In the best case, maybe it means democracy, which is dictatorship by a majority. Not everyone. Minorities are sacrificed in a democracy. The greatest minority being the individual. Right? And the worst case, the public good is like a dictatorship defined by Kim Jong-un or something, right? And then there's a bunch of in-between ways to interpret public good. And that's dictatorship by representatives and unelected administrators. And both the US and China fall into that category, both of them. China, by the way, has the largest legislative body in the world. It's called the National People's Congress. They elect she. She is not a dictator. She is elected by the National People's Congress. Now, they might be appointed and whatever. I'm not saying their elections are exactly the same as ours. And clearly he has a lot more power, but he rules at the whim of the National People's Congress. Right? I think US is still better than China, but they're both in that in-between thing. They're not Kim Jong-un, and they're not actually like full-on democracy, 51% get their way, both of which are bad. All right. Both systems are based on the public good, at least not maybe in the founding documents of the US, but kind of where we are now, everything's about the public good. And good, as I've said before, good is a value judgment. There's no such thing as being intrinsically good or not. There's no universe. You can't, like, nothing is good or not good apart from a valuer and a purpose, right? The word good, if you're going to use it properly, philosophically, it means there's a valuer. Someone saying it's good for whom, for what purpose? Who says it's good for what purpose? Who values it? It requires a valuer. There's no intrinsic universe that values a thing. There's no value to a thing intrinsically. Values require valuers. And if we're talking about values to humans, they require human valuers. A classic example here is poison. It's good to someone with cancer for the purpose of shrinking a tumor. Bad for most of us most of the time, right? Even poison isn't intrinsically good or bad. So good or bad are value judgments that are made by a valuer for a purpose. In the case of the public good, there's no proper valuer, right? And there can't be a proper valuer, except I guess you could have unanimous consent. If literally everyone agrees to do something, then you could say it's the public good, but then who needs the state? Force isn't necessary. We're all just going to do it, right? So absent that, the public good, the valuer that decides what's in the public good is some third party. It has to be. It has to be, which is either a majority, that's the third party, like the 51%, or a dictator or some representatives. And the purpose is determined by that third party, right? Which is part of the reason why government actions don't always make sense. There's like, you end up with this quagmire of bloated bureaucracy, and that leads to vague and ambiguous and unstable purpose, because everyone's kind of, I think this is the purpose, right? There's too many people involved in the process of determining what's the value and what's the purpose. What does public good mean? Too many people get to, that's why you end up with administrations or an administrative state that sometimes doesn't seem consistent. But anyway, with respect to those of us in the US, commitment to reason and individual sovereignty does not require preserving the configuration of the entire United States politically. It does not require saving Washington, D.C., thankfully, or convincing people in Berkeley, which probably won't happen in 100 years. But Enlightenment ideas are like seeds. They need fertile soil to grow. They're not going to grow well on your ranch with your nuclear family. I mean, they'll grow there, but they're very limited, right? The United States nurtured those Enlightenment ideas, at least partially, and they went from a weak, pathetic colony to a world superpower more than capable of defending itself. All right, and actually now it's probably more than capable of meddling all around the globe, right? I would call it the largest empire in the history of mankind. All right, not in terms of land mass, but let's just take a look. The U.S., by the way, went a couple hundred years. Crappy colony, bunch of backwater, slack-jawed crap, and that's how we were viewed, right? Crappy little colony. The U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency. We're the largest government, if you look at expenditures by far. I think China and Russia have a slightly larger standing army than ours. I think we have 2 million. They've got somewhere around 3. But we have the largest military budget by far. We're not about throwing bodies at the problem. We're about throwing tech and money. There's 750 foreign military bases in 80 countries for the U.S. Just about the only thing we don't have is a Death Star, right? So whatever your assessment of this situation is, the U.S. achieved this level of power by, all they did was kind of, sort of, half-heartedly, they implemented a political system kind of based on preserving individual sovereignty, and they didn't do a great job. That's all they did. And they went from crap to where we are now. That's pretty good. And we, those of us who understand the implementation errors that the Founding Fathers made, we can do better. Now we can do better. I'm not saying we can be perfect, but we can do better. We can build a political system focused on preserving individual rights, combined with a culture of reason, with human flourishing as the standard. That's an unstoppable force. It provides a really rich soil for the Enlightenment seeds of reason-based epistemology and ethics of individual sovereignty, and all their corollaries, right? Property rights, free speech, scientific method, right to self-defense, free markets. It provides a rich soil for the fruits of all that stuff to grow. That's how you get scientific progress, technological progress, explosions of art and music, the advancements that you read about in science fiction novels, right? I mean, or in, remember Back to the Future? I was always hoping there would be hoverboards by now, but like hoverboards and cancer cures and space travel and anti-aging and whatever, like all that stuff comes when you implement these ideas and you let a large number of people be politically free. You give them the liberty, you protect their individual rights, you give them property rights, you let them do their thing. The United States wasn't designed in 1776 by like, I know, this is how we'll plan to have the largest military in 200 years. Like, wasn't a thing. They just, this is how cell phones will work. Let's have a central planner to invent cell phones. That's not how it worked. And if you're interested in preserving, or maybe the better word is recapturing freedom, and preserving or renormalizing concepts like individual sovereignty, if you actually want to win against the enemies of the Enlightenment, which I do, that's why I'm doing this show and why I'm involved in Unsafe Space. If you want to win against the enemies like progressives, or or the Great Reset, or socialists, or wokies, or leftists, it doesn't matter what you call them, even populists. They're all forms of collectivism as opposed to individualism. The nuances of any particular collectivist system don't really matter in the long run, right? The summary, that the TLDR on collectivist ethics, is that it's all manifestations of some variant of it's for the public good, all of it. So if you actually want to win, like I do, we need an entire society, not small communities of self-sufficient farmers. And we don't need a bunch of Luddites who are one broken refrigerator against, away from subsistence farming, right? We need a vibrant, rich, wealthy, thriving, abundant, populous, technologically advanced society, one that's actually capable of preserving, extending, and defending individualism. So the reason I'm saying this is, Lafayette Naked says, oh, we have a Death Star. Yeah, I haven't had my clearance in a while, so I don't remember one, but maybe now. But look, I think we need to fundamentally embrace technology, and I see a lot of people in the liberty community, a lot of them do embrace technology, but a lot of them are like, they reject it, right? And I'm not saying that we don't reject some applications of technology if the purpose is evil, but we need to look at science and technology as opportunities for expanding human flourishing, for making us more efficient, more productive, increasing our long-term happiness. We need to fundamentally embrace that, city life as well as rural life is all good, it's necessary. We need people who want to live in the city. Everyone has preferences, right? And a lot of advances require a large number of people to work together physically and be there, right? We need a culture that explicitly embraces individualism and is immune to collectivist ideology in the same way that people see the danger of cancer or anything else. They see smoking as a danger. I guess people see that mostly now, right? They need to see collectivist ideology as a danger, as it's death, which is what it is. And by the way, I'm saying collectivism, not community. I've talked about this before. You'll find it if you don't understand the difference. But community is voluntary. It's voluntary. It's voluntary and vital. It's not collectivist, right? But if we have a society like that, a decaying Rome, even one as large as the US, can't hold a candle to that society. And I'm not saying we transform the entire US into that, but it can't be just our towns. It's got to be the size of several states, right? I don't know. If I had to guess, there's probably 10, 11 million, libertarian leaning kind of people. If you look at I think Gary Johnson got 3.3% of the vote in the election, and in 2016 or whatever. So, okay, so that's bigger than Portugal. And not all libertarians are the same, and there's some conservatives that are lean towards individual rights and that kind of stuff. But we have enough people to be a decent size entity, like a vibrant society doing stuff. And there's people that are always asking what states to move to do this. Should we be Florida? There's the Free State Project in New Hampshire. There's Texas, Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, right? I still don't think any of these are the obvious choice. I mean, I will make my own choice to do it, but we're all going to make our own choices. We're all going to make different choices. Not all of us, but there'll be several different choices. And it may, the truth is, it may just be too early to tell where a freedom-minded culture can actually congeal, right? I used to think Texas was a great idea. I'm not so sure because it's on the verge already of being kind of blue, and the red that is in Texas tends to be more conservative and less liberty-minded per se. But there's a rebellious culture there too, so who knows, right? I wouldn't have said, honestly, 6 years ago, I wouldn't have said Florida's the place, but now we're looking at Florida going, I don't know, Florida looks interesting, right? So maybe we don't know. But right now, at this moment in history, we have a Supreme Court that's friendly to the idea of state sovereignty. Thankfully, they seem to be. And so in terms of political action, now's the time for us to focus on getting the federal government to relinquish power to states, which is mostly the Supreme Court, so we can't do too much, but also Congress. And maybe focus on your state, the states that you think it's going to be good. Get there. Focus on that to get that state to flex its muscles. Pick a federal law and get that state to defy it, to challenge that law, or support someone who's doing that. Because we need to find states that have the will and ability to defy the federal government in the direction of liberty, right? Not in the direction of socialism. California is good at that, right? But we need to normalize the defiance of the feds at a state level, right? So if you're, if you're like me, if you're stuck in like California or New York or somewhere, I think political action in that state is a waste of your time. So maybe until we move, pick a target state and maybe help them. But I think maybe this is a simple point and you guys didn't need to hear it, but I needed to hear it, so I'm saying it. That's our goal. Our goal is not to buy farms together. Our goal is not to check out and buy farms together, not to build like Waco 2.0 without the crazy religion. It's to build a vibrant, wealthy, technologically advanced community together. It's to build alternative tech, an entire alternative economy. It's to be more advanced than the intellectually primitive philosophy that's ruling DC right now. And from that kind of a stronghold, if we had 3-4 states that were defying the federal government, that were moving towards liberty, from there we can fight the enemy of the Enlightenment. That's enough, right? That's enough to fight. We can't fight it if we're moving to homesteads and, churning butter. But we can if we're focusing on a few areas that can fight the federal government and embracing technology and embracing not just tech, but progress generally, actual progress. Welcome, by the way. Your friend Paul just joins. He happened to become a member during this show, it looks like. So welcome. JB says marijuana is the go-to example of defying federal law. There's lots of these, right? I mean, there's sanctuary cities, our go-to example here. Not that that's a defiance that I like, but there are plenty. Marijuana is a great one. Marijuana is one of those things that I can't get too excited about because while I think it's important, I don't think the federal government should be doing. I think it's wrong to be enforcing drug laws. I think the war on drugs is a failure, all that stuff. I also look at it, I'm like, really, is that really the battle that we need to fight? How about we refuse to pay taxes? How about we do something meaningful? Who the hell cares? If I never went another day in my life smoking a joint or having any pot, I don't care. I'd much rather spend the rest of my life not paying taxes, though. If I'm going to focus somewhere. And just a note, by the way, your friend Paul is right. Legal weed is super expensive. That's because it's not, none of it's actually legal. It's all been the places that legalized it were massive administrative states that pulled it into their huge bureaucratic regulatory system. So here in California, I think a majority of the weed that's consumed is still on the black market because it's so expensive. I don't know about other states. Kind of bad timing for the taxes thing, says Dawn. Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's why I said I think they should be tarred and feathered. But look, I want to make there's a small subset I want. I almost every time I talk about like we don't have to focus on the whole U.S. We don't have to save Washington. We have to focus on a few areas and build a society there. There's always a few like virtue signaling blowhards that say something to the effect of, you're giving up by not fighting for the entire U.S., right? These are usually people who haven't sacrificed their career and wealth to focus on promoting Enlightenment values, I'll point out. Like I have, but I've said things like we need to make a tactical retreat to certain states and kind of fortify and regroup, and their response is like, you're a coward, giving up isn't the answer. And I have one basic response to those kind of arguments. I just want to treat them all as a whole. Bravado is not a substitute for brains, and you're a moron if that's what your argument is. I'm not interested in being a swaggering moron. I don't want to die in a blaze of glory, neither literally nor metaphorically. That's not my goal, right? I don't know if it's apocryphal, but I don't think it is. There was a story like that during the Meiji Restoration. There was at the towards the end of the Satsuma Rebellion, the samurais that were left like ran at the bullets. It was like they died. They did go out in a blaze of glory. Like, that's not what I want. My goal is to win. It's for the ideas to win. What's the Sun Tzu quote? You'll win if you know when to fight and when not to fight, or something, right? If you think the culture war is over who controls the ideology of Washington, D.C., then you and I are not fighting the same battle. And by the way, you will lose in the short and medium term, at least. I mean, I don't know, in 300 years maybe. But my goal, which I think is shared by most of the people in this community, is for the ideas to win. And the only reason that any part of America even plays a part in that, there's two reasons, I guess. One is I live here. That's kind of a minor reason because I live in California, so I don't know if that counts as America. But the second reason, this is the place in the world with the highest concentration of liberty-minded people. In other words, this is where the troops are. These are the people that need to be defended. These are the people who can do the defending, right? More people here understand, if not intellectually, because I think a lot don't understand intellectually, but intuitively, people get the value of liberty in a way that if you go to Japan, they don't get, right? Or even go to Europe, they don't get. They don't. France can talk about liberté all the time, but they don't have a fundamental, visceral understanding of it the way, an average person in Oklahoma does. Right? So that's the reason I want to do it here. But, if Cuba had suddenly evolved into a model of individual rights after Castro, and now it was the crucible of the Enlightenment 2.0 movement, I'd advocate moving to Cuba, absolutely. Right? Just like so many free people around the globe moved to America over the past 200 years. It was the best. Right? And if I advocate moving to Cuba, I do my best to convince people elsewhere to adopt the awesome individualism in Cuba, which is the key to their inevitable success. I don't think Cuba is likely to do that, but I'm just making a point, right? Like, I don't care where on the globe. It just so happens that in America, this is the best place. We still have the best culture. It's a subculture, but we still have it, and there still is a remnant of that American spirit alive. So my summary on this is, by the way, your friend Paul just gave the super chat. I got to read it. Thank you. This is he modernized Sun Tzu for us all. His modernization is, you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them. Yeah. And if you want to be a slap-jawed idiot and go out in a blaze of glory, do it on your own time. I want to win. That's what I want to do. I have kids, right? I want to win for them. And myself. Anyway, the summary here is, look, don't check out and don't give up on science and technology. Don't think that the Randy Weaver plan is the smart move. Embrace the complexity of modern culture, embrace the technology, and focus on building a parallel economy, building a community of like-minded people. That I think we've often conflate, because the last time people wrote about and talked about individualism and individual liberty and individual rights, it was like, in the 18th century. It's like we kind of have this mindset like, it's an old thing, so we have to have like an old lifestyle to talk about it. Like there's something quaint about it, and that's kind of cool. Like it doesn't have to be quaint. It can be Star Trek level technology talking about individualism and individual rights and like that, because it leads to that. That's what leads to that. And I also do want to make a note, especially because we just read Alex Epstein's book, Fossil Future, which if you haven't read it, I'm going to recommend again, you can go watch the book club video we did on Sunday of it. But don't confuse science and tech, which is what I'm talking about, with our knowledge system, which is a term that I got from Alex in Fossil Future. And I love the term, and it's a good descriptor. Right. So in the primitive world, if you want just a primitive understanding of reality, you can just observe reality, use your basic reasoning skills to see some cause and effect. My kid right now she's noticing like, hey, if I drop it, it falls. You don't need a PhD for that. She'll figure that out. She has figured that out. Like, got it. Drop, fall. That's like a very low resolution understanding of gravity, right? If you want to understand more deeply, then you need more than just basic reasoning skills. You probably need a scientific method, careful observation and analysis. Maybe you figure out, the rate at which acceleration happens when things are falling towards the Earth. Maybe you figure out F equals ma, right? You do some Newton, but Newton invented one of the inventors of calculus. Right, so that takes a little bit more deep reasoning skills and some scientific work. But the modern world is way more complex than that. And we rely on a lot of hyper specialization. It's like super special. It's impossible for one person to even understand relatively simple things. And actually, this will be fun. I'm going to play a clip. I'm going to play a clip from, it's a couple minutes. It's Milton Friedman talking about an article called I, Pencil by Leonard Read. And he's using this example to talk about the values of the price mechanism in the free market. But I think it's also an example of how much hidden complexity we take for granted. So let's just watch this clip for a second.
Then by a very simple example that I owe to an old friend of mine, Leonard Read, who once wrote a little article called I, the Pencil. This is the only prop I have for this TV show. As you can see, it's a plain yellow pencil. Said Leonard Read in his article, it's a funny thing, he said, there's nobody in the world who knows how to make a pencil. Now that seems like a silly thing to say, isn't it? This is just the most obvious thing. It's only a piece of wood with something black in the middle and the little red tip at the end. What do you mean nobody knows how to make a pencil? Well, suppose you were to start to set out to make a pencil. First of all, you have to get some wood, don't you? Where do you get the wood? You have to go to the Pacific Northwest, probably, and cut down some trees. How do you cut down some trees? You have to have some saws to cut it with. Where do you get the saws? You have to have some steel. Where do you get the steel? You have to have a steel mill. In order to have the steel mill, you have to get the iron ore, and you can add all the rest. So in order to know how to make a pencil, you would have to know everything there is to know about how to start from iron ore and coal and get iron and convert it into saws and cut down trees. But that's only the beginning.
Man, it's not my day with tech. For some reason, that video is super slow and choppy. I don't understand why. I'm going to try something to fix it. What a day. Hold on.
Example that I owe to an old friend of mine, Leonard Read, who once wrote a little article called I, the Pencil. This is the only prop I have for this TV show. As you can see, it's a plain yellow pencil. Said Leonard Read in his article, you know, it's a funny thing, he said, there's nobody in the world who knows how to make a pencil. Now, that seems like a silly thing to say, isn't it? This is just the most obvious thing. It's only a piece of wood with something black in the middle and a little red tip at the end. What do you mean nobody knows how to make a pencil? Well, suppose you were to start to set out to make a pencil. First of all, you have to get some wood, don't you? Where do you get the wood? You have to go to the Pacific Northwest, probably, and cut down some trees. How do you cut down some trees? You have to have some saws to cut it with. Where do you get the saws? You have to have some steel. Where do you get the steel? You have to have a steel mill. In order to have the steel mill, you have to get the iron ore, and you can add all the rest. So in order to know how to make a pencil, you would have to know everything there is to know about how to start from iron ore and coal and get iron and convert it into saws and cut down trees. But that's only the beginning. This black stuff in the middle that we call lead isn't lead. It's graphite, I think. I'm not absolutely sure. And I am told it comes from some mines in South America. So in order to get that black stuff in between, you would have to take a trip down to South America and know all about how to extract graphite from the mines in South America. Now this little red tip at the top, that's rubber. Where's it come from? Well, the major source of natural rubber is Malaya. That's quite another distance. And I don't know how many of you know that the rubber tree was not native to Malaysia. It was originally imported into Malaysia by private enterprises trying to make some money, and they transplanted it from somewhere in South America. I think it was Brazil, but I don't guarantee that. And they brought it over into Malaysia and established the plantations there and got this rubber. So somehow or other, in order to make a pencil, you'd have to know about the rubber. Now, there's a little brass tip around here, and I've run out of my own technological knowledge. I don't have the slightest idea where that comes from, though there are probably people in the audience who could tell us. Nobody knows how to make a pencil. But the miracle of this pencil isn't that nobody knows how to make it. The miracle of the pencil is, how did it get made? Who told that fellow over in Malaya to tap his tree and send a little bit of rubber over here to put at the end of this pencil so I could have a pencil in my hand?
All right. Hopefully that looked really choppy to me, but hopefully the audio is okay for you guys. I will. Yeah, I'll assume that the audio was okay. Let me know in chat if it wasn't. And if it wasn't, I'll try and explain the story. But look, he okay, good. Audio was good. Thank you guys. So look, like I said, this is also an example. He's talking about the price mechanism for the free market, but this is also an example of how much there's hidden complexity there is in everything, and how much we actually rely on other people and their expertise and their labor and the scientific knowledge and the technological knowledge. I mean, does anyone in chat know how to do you know how to mine iron and smelt it and make steel? I guess you need copper for steel as well. Do you know how to do that efficiently at all? Like, if you had to make, could you make a steel building? I don't even, I could, like, I could maybe make some steel from iron and copper, but I'm not sure I could even do that. I couldn't get the iron and copper. I don't know how to, I certainly couldn't make enough to make a building, right? And that's just a pencil, right? His example is just the pencil. And when it comes to something as complex as, for example, the climate and energy production, which is discussed in Alex's book, or vaccines, or anything like that, we don't have a direct understanding of the science. We rely on this chain of information, which Alex Epstein is calling knowledge system in Fossil Future. And I showed this slide during the book club, but I'm going to show it again because I just want to walk through it for people who want to understand what I'm talking about. So there's reality at the top here, right? There's this, thing that we'll never really fully understand. And for simple things, for simple understanding, we can maybe directly observe it. You can look up and see that the sun is there. And actually, when I was my oldest daughter was really young, I did a lot of direct observation experiments with her, where I was like, well, look, she went outside every hour for a day, for example, and she had a picture of our backyard, and she drew on it where the sun was every hour, and she could she could observe the sun moves. And actually, when people say, well, science is always changing, blah, 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 and they say, we used to think that the sun revolved around the earth. The sun does revolve around the earth at a certain level of granularity. If you're just a farmer and you're never going to move from the spot you are, that's a fine model for reality. It does revolve around the earth. As far as you're concerned, like, that's the granularity that you need. You need more granularity if you're going to start putting satellites up, but like, it's the granularity that changes, not the fact, like, even today, if you go outside, you'll see that it rises in the east and sets in the west, and it pretty much revolves around you. Like, that's what happens. So it's that granular. So you can recognize low resolution stuff directly, but when it's really complex, we've got this knowledge system, and this is the knowledge system that Alex talks about. You've got reality, and you've got researchers who perform experiments or whatever and directly observe reality. Now, there can be biases there in terms of what gets funded, and if they're looking for particular results, they'll find them. That happens quite a lot. There's a lot of, if you have to come to certain conclusions, you'll certainly word things a different way. I just saw someone talking today about a study about heat-related deaths, and they're on the rise and blah, blah, blah. And the guy was saying, well, if this paper were written objectively, it would say, well, but cold-related deaths, for the same reason that heat-related deaths are on the rise, cold-related deaths are on the decline. And actually, cold-related deaths are much more common. And so we're actually net negative on death. Yay! Like, so there's different ways to write the same. You learn something. There's different ways to characterize it. So that can happen even at the research level. Then you have people who take all these expert papers and all the research, and they synthesize it. They put it together and say, okay, this paints the overall picture of where the state of technology today, right, or in this particular field. And then they disseminate it. They have spokespeople that go out and talk about it, and they have the New York Times writes articles, and the Atlantic writes articles, and they disseminate this information to us. And then they have evaluators. Also, you also have evaluators in the New York Times or whatever, and you have them saying, well, that's what this means, and that's often what translates into political action, right? So when someone says, well, let's use climate change as an example. Someone will say, well, you need to believe the science, and if you don't think that we should have a law penalizing CO2 emissions, if we don't think we should try and aim for net zero CO2 emissions by 2050, you're a climate change denier. Well, what they're doing is they're mistaking the science for the knowledge system and the evaluation that the knowledge system is providing. And those are two different things. So I'm not suggesting that we're not suggesting that we don't criticize the knowledge system, right? And it's important to recognize those biases and hidden premises and errors and sometimes outright agendas in that knowledge system. It's crucial that we don't confuse that knowledge system with science and technology fundamentally, because science is how we discover truths about the world, and technology properly utilized is how we make our lives better. Those are great things. The knowledge system can have a lot of problems by the time that information filters down and we're told, AOC stands up and says there's blah, 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 here's the conclusion, the oceans are going to boil. Like, well, that's a failure of the knowledge. It's not a failure of science, right? And the same can be true for other things. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about vaccines, or at least the COVID vaccine when they hear about this. All right, so that was kind of a rant, but it's important to me to really push back on the kind of Luddite idea of fighting for individualism by being a Luddite and saying, like, it's fine to be against big tech, but not against tech as such. It's fine to be against the knowledge system, but not knowledge as such, not science as such. Those are great things, and they're our thing. They're ours in the sense that we're the ones that have the philosophical soil that's required for those things to flourish, right? The collectivists don't end up with awesome science and cures to cancer without, they don't end up with that at all. They don't end up with that. Individualists do. Liberty creates that. Freedom creates that. You know, Milton Friedman's example of the pencil, like the market creates that, not central planners. So that was my only real point on that. Okay. It was a long point, and maybe a lot of you are like, I already knew that. I don't need to be told that. So, and that's why, by the way, why I asked how many people work in tech. I'm just curious. I'm curious if, like, so far this poll here in chat says that 21% of you work in tech. So good. So you should get this already. And the 79% don't hate on them for working in tech. It's good that they work in tech. Okay. We should build our alternate tech, which maybe is a conversation for another day. All right. I said I want to talk about intuition just for a moment because I've seen some comments about it, which I want to help clarify people's thinking on. If I had to summarize what kind of some of what I've been hearing is, and I hear this a lot, I hear something to the effect of, my intuition is sometimes right, therefore reason isn't the only way of knowing. Intuition is a perfectly good way of knowing, and you can't just rely on reason. In similar vein, you hear people be like, well, sometimes emotions matter too. You can't just have reason. Emotions are, there's emotional knowledge. Like there's that kind of like pushback as if reason is in opposition to those things. And it's the enemies of reason who have put reason in this position or tried to convince you that reason is opposed to those things, and it is not, and I want to explain that. Reason is not the only way of gaining information, but it is the only way of knowing. And there's a distinction there that I'd like to elaborate on. Knowing is epistemological. Right? Epistemology is like, how do we know what we know? It's a study of knowledge, right? It's the theory of knowledge, right? How do we know what we know? Now, everything, we're human beings. Other than Gene Ellis in chat, we're all flawed, right? Everything about our sense data is faulty. All 5 senses are faulty. Our intuition's faulty. Everything's faulty. Because we're not omniscient. We're not omniscient beings. I'm not picking on Jean. I like Jean. That's why I'm saying that about her. We're not omniscient. Everything about our sense data is faulty. Everything is faulty. Now, bad philosophers, by the way, use this to say, see, you can't know anything. Put that aside. These are people who just want to destroy humans and humanity, right? If we were omniscient, we wouldn't need reason. We'd just know. Narcissists don't think they need reason because they just know they're right, right? But because our acquisition of knowledge is imperfect, because how we get this information is imperfect, how we synthesize it is imperfect, because it's prone to error, we need a process for checking that our conclusions actually correspond to reality. We need some way of checking that, right? If you're an engineer, think about it as like a feedback loop. You need feedback, so you know, like, how close am I to reality here? I need to adjust. And if you don't have that feedback loop, you're dark. You're in the dark. You're blind. We need a process for checking our conclusions, and that's what reason is. Reason is simply a process for verifying correspondence to reality. Right? It's the art of non-contradictory identification, is what it's called. Which is another way of saying it's the art of identifying what's actually true. Right? Reason does not deny the fact that humans have emotions, that humans have intuition, which is the same as emotions in my book. It's a feeling. Intuition is a feeling rather than an argument, right? Humans have those things. That's a fact. And those things are important to us. In fact, they're driving factors. Emotions are ultimately our motivation, right? You can reason your way into being a billionaire, but it doesn't matter if you're miserable, because that's, like, it's emotional motivation that matters. you can get the girl, but it doesn't matter if you don't feel anything for the girl. If it's the wrong girl, like getting the girl needs to be motivated by which girl, who do you feel like you need to go be with, right? Like emotions are your motivating factor. So reason doesn't deny that emotions exist or that they're important. But it does deny that emotion and intuition are reliable sources of information about external reality. In other words, saying you feel a certain way does not mean you're correct. The only reliable thing about emotions and intuition are that they're telling you something true and accurate about your internal state. That's what they're telling you, right? And that might be valuable. Sometimes that's all you have to go on. There are situations in life where the only information you really have is information about your internal state, and that's what you got to use to make a decision, right? And usually that's because, I mean, the examples I could think of is that's because of time constraints, right? So I'll give 2 examples. One will be non-life and death. I think we've probably all done this, although maybe I'm projecting. So maybe only I have ever done this. But let's say you're driving on the freeway. You're kind of not paying much attention. Maybe you're zoning out or thinking of a brilliant philosophical argument, I'm sure. And suddenly you notice like there's an exit that you're approaching. And you don't have time to think about like, oh, wait, where was I going? And how do I get there? And is this the right exit that I should take or not? You don't have time to make that decision. You got to like get off the exit or stay on. You just have to make a decision. And you have a feeling. You have intuition about whether you should get off the freeway or stay on. Like that's all it is. You don't like think through it because you don't have time. Right? So you follow your intuition, presumably. Because it's all you've got in that moment. That's all you got. But no matter which decision you make after following your intuition, reason dictates that you take the time afterward to think about whether that was the right decision and whether you need to turn around or not, right? So intuition is valuable, and actually your intuition can often be right in situations like this, especially if you're going someplace that you go often, right? Your intuition will just like, yeah, right, get off at this exit, this is the exit, or whatever. A life and death example, which I'm lifting, I might not be doing it exactly because it's been years since I read this book, but I'm lifting from Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. You're walking down the street, you see a guy walking towards you, and you feel uneasy about it. You feel fear. Now, there's a time constraint. You can't stop and whip out a spreadsheet and evaluate like what are the things that what are the signs that he might be a predator, and what are the things like you don't have time to do an analysis rationally. You got a feeling. What do? Do you cross the street, or do you keep walking towards the guy? Now, on the one hand, if you cross the street and he's just a regular nice guy, you might feel like a bit of a jerk. That's the downside. On the other hand, if you don't cross the street and he's a thug who is planning on murdering you and stashing your body in the alley, the consequences are catastrophic. So Gavin de Becker would say, cross the effing street and sort it out later. And if that makes you, I think he was like, if that makes you a bitch, then it makes you a bitch. Like, I think he was talking to women, right? Like, fine, cross the street. Follow your intuition, because it's important in this case. The consequences of not following it are catastrophic. So the consequences of following it and being wrong are minor. So intuition, I think intuition is, I mean, it's similar to animal instincts. I think it operates much faster. It does operate much faster than reason. It's able to integrate a lot of sense data, but also your experiences and context, and sum them up really quickly, but it gives you a really low resolution piece of information, and that is, this doesn't feel right. That's what you get. That's the information you get. And that kind of low resolution piece of information is less reliable, right? The reason it doesn't feel right could be a result of lots of relevant data that you were unable to process, rationally quickly, but your subconscious could do it really quickly. Like, oh, the time of day, it's getting this dark, or it's 2 a.m, and the emptiness of the street, there's no one around, there's not cameras. The way this guy's walking looks weird. He seems to be looking away. Maybe he's got a weapon. It looks like maybe there's a bulge where a gun would be, or you're kind of vaguely aware that there was lots of crime in this area, or maybe you've had past experiences with predators, whatever. There could be a lot of valid reasons that added up to like doesn't feel right, and that's your intuition. That's when it's right. It's providing relevant data. It could be that the data that your intuition is using to give you that feeling is not stuff that's super relevant to the situation, right? It could be that he reminds you of a character in a scary movie that you just watched, or a friend just showed you some kind of scary story and you're on the edge, or you're traumatized by a kid, by someone who's wearing a sweatshirt like his, or whatever. Like, it could be a whole bunch of reasons that just don't. That's why you feel weird, and your intuition's wrong. Happens, right? And obviously, in this case, the stakes are much higher than taking the wrong exit on the freeway. So it's best to play it safe in situations like that, and follow your intuition when it comes to danger. I think you see a lot of. I think it's our animals. I think I've seen a lot of animals who are like afraid of snake-shaped objects, right? Because like, well, I mean, and even if maybe later they figure out that it's not a snake, but like initially, I think a lot of humans are also initially like, that it's a snake-shaped object, but it's just a hose, right? That's your intuition kicking in, like, yeah, it's bad, and then you can use your reason and be like, oh no, that's a hose, and that's not a snake, right? So being rational does not mean denying any value of your intuition, denying emotions. Recognizing that, being rational means that you recognize that your emotions or your intuition are faulty. In other words, they're not reliable indicators of external reality. And you commit to reason as being I was going to say best, but really the only method for determining reality correspondence. That's the method you use for making decisions when you have time to evaluate them. And that's the method you use for making knowledge claims to other people about things. Because your intuition is not an argument, right? And obviously there are decisions in your life for which the emotions themselves are relevant. These are personal decisions. Who should you marry? Obviously the feelings about them are important. But if you're rational, the feelings aren't the only consideration, even for something like who should you marry, right? Because you might feel, a lot of love for someone, and you might feel effusive toward them. But if you sit down rationally and you realize, well, their character assessment's kind of flawed, and we don't have a lot of shared values, and our life goals are different, like, probably not a good candidate for marriage, regardless of how you feel, right? So even something like marriage takes feelings into account, but shouldn't only be based on feelings, contrary to Disney. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about intuition and reason. I'll fight you naked's upset that I called them flawed. Well, you in particular, buddy. I'm telling you what. Okay. Gene says exiting from the wrong lane can be a life and death matter. Could be. I'll fight you naked says, what if it's racist to cross the street? Well, racist or dead. Those are your choices. And everything's racist now, so obviously it's racist to cross the street. I wanted to start doing something where we work on arguments together, right? Like, I want to start doing a thing where you guys give me arguments that you're having trouble refuting, or maybe arguments that you want to make that you're having trouble making, and we kind of work on them together. Maybe I take a stab at it. If I can't do it, someone else does it. But I just asked about this today on Discord, and so I don't have a litany of topics there, but there was one thing people talked about, and that was, this isn't really a specific argument, but a couple people wanted to go over the rhetorical triangle, which is this rhetorical appeals, a set of rhetorical appeals that were identified by Aristotle. And the question was like, let's talk about like logos, pathos, and ethos. And I'm not going to, it's late already, I'm not going to go too deep on this, but these are kind of methods of convincing people. Think of it that way. They're not methods of logical argument. They're methods of convincing other people. It's rhetoric, not logic, right? So the first is logos. That is like facts, logic, statistics, that kind of stuff. You can convince people that way. The second is pathos. And that's kind of, you can think about that as emotional manipulation, right? When you watch a drug company ad and they show barefoot people dancing and smiling on a beach while a lawyer is like, this drug may cause death, like side effects may include, whatever, it's horrible stuff. But then the music is playing and there's a couple like holding hands on the beach and smiling. Like, that's emotional manipulation. They're trying to make you feel good about it. Similarly, the leftists on a lot of climate change stuff, it's apocalyptic, right? It's like, oh my God, the oceans are going to boil and we're all going to die, right? Like, that's fear. It's fear mongering. It's also a form of pathos. It's emotional. And the other side of that triangle is ethos, which you would think is ethics because that's what it means in Greek, but it's not ethics. It's really the credibility of the speaker. Are you like, it's a speaker viewed as an expert and really incredible? And along these lines, oh, by the way, Jean Ellis just made a good comment. I just want to say, she says reading body language is life-saving. It can be, and that's a way to train your intuition better. Because sometimes, if you can consciously learn and become an expert in a particular thing, that does seep into your subconscious, and then your intuition is more likely to be correct in making assessments of that nature because it's something that you've got experience with and have trained. So yeah, I'm not good at body language, but perhaps I should be. Okay. So I don't think she minds if I quote her a little bit. So Coley says to me, someone in our community, she says, in theory, I believe I understand what kind of argument goes where. She's talking about the difference between logos, pathos, and ethos. In theory, I believe I understand what kind of argument goes where, but in practice, it's actually a bit difficult to make a single style of argument without including another and also be convincing. That's the kicker, right? She says, I think ethos is the hardest part to peg down for me. And then she says, as far as I can tell, the trick with ethos is that it relies on shared values, or else it's not likely to work. Logos and pathos are easier to employ, but only for the type of person you're talking to. Try pathos with a logos person, no dice, and vice versa. Not that people are pure like that, but people do tend to lean. Okay, I've got a general response here to this. Again, I'm not going to get too deep because it's not like a specific argument we're going in here to here. But I think first and most important, I am a firm believer that you need to have actually a sound argument before you start. You need to have a sound, like just based on logos, right? You need to have a sound, rational argument. The other two sides of that triangle are really just tactics to use to convince people. But I think you're risking performing a great disservice and evil in the world if you employ the other tactics without first making sure you have a firm, actual, logical argument available. So start with that. I don't mean lead with that when you're talking to someone, but like make sure you have that first. But obviously, much to my chagrin, most people aren't rational enough to hear pure logos arguments and be convinced. Some are. And actually, I think that should be a personal goal of all of ours, right? Commitment to the process of reason as opposed to the emotional attachment to a conclusion. And this is maybe I'm going to sound like I'm being an ass and tooting my own horn. I'm pretty good at this compared to most people I know. And only because I had to do this 20-something years ago, and it was really gut-wrenching. I made a decision about religion that was really gut-wrenching because I didn't want to give it up. But I was convinced logically that I needed to. And that was really, really hard. And that was just really, really hard. I hated it. And it made me really uncomfortable. But it was I strive to have a dedication to that process. Obviously, I'm not perfect because I'm not Jean Ellis. But I think that should be a goal. The goal is to let go of your commitment to the conclusion and commit to the process. But with most people aren't even like near there, right? Usually you need to break through an emotional commitment before people will be willing to hear an argument. Usually they've got an emotional commitment to some conclusion. And before I talk about breaking through that emotional commitment, using pathos, there's a caveat here. I don't enjoy doing that. I know it's more effective generally. I'm not particularly good at it. I probably should get better at it, actually. I don't enjoy talking to people who require a lot of work to burrow through their emotional barriers. I find it tiresome. I find it laborious. And frankly, I have much less respect for people who need too much of that. I just don't like it. It limits my effectiveness, frankly. But I'm not sure that I could be happy if I think it would challenge my commitment to making arguments and pushing these ideas if I was constantly trying to break through emotional barriers. It is tiring. It is tiring. There are people who love it. There's people who love emotional manipulation, and they'll be like, oh, I'll package this up and break through their emotional barrier first and then feed them some logic. That's awesome. Man, I just don't like it. So maybe I'm not the best person to give advice about that. That's what I'm saying. But using pathos especially to break through emotional barriers in order to get to that logos is useful. And one thing I want to say about Coley's comment is there's no need to employ these tactics in isolation, right? She was like, it's hard to do one without the other. Why would you do that, right? I think of logos as the main course. As I said, you need that. And I think the other two, logos and pathos and ethos are kind of dressing to get people to open up to the main course. So pathos helps them open up to the possibility emotionally. Logos actually makes the case. And then the ethos kind of reassures them that they're not being duped. There's this fear that they're being duped when they're going to change their mind. So they need to feel like you're trustworthy, right? So if you convince someone using only pathos and ethos, but you don't use logos, you only use pathos and ethos, I don't think you've actually convinced them of anything. I think you've changed the sounds of a non-thinking zombie and the sounds they're making, but that zombie doesn't actually understand what he's saying or why. So he's likely to just be swayed by the next person using emotional arguments and appeal to authority, right? I think we all know people like this. They agree with the last person with whom they spoke, right? Like, that's their opinion they have because they never really had that opinion in the first place. They were swayed by the pathos and the ethos, and there was no logos. There's no commitment to the argument or to the reasoning. So logos is the main course, which is why if your main course sucks, you ultimately fail, even if you temporarily win a zombie ally. So which is why I said you got to start with that. So the other thing I want to say about Coley's comment, she says the trick with ethos is that it relies on shared values. And I'm going to say yes and no, mostly yes. Mostly yes. The no part is part of ethos is just trusting your integrity. It's getting them to trust your integrity. So if you're caught saying one thing and doing another, that will undermine your credibility. If you're too salesy, use too much hyperbolic language, whatever, that will undermine your credibility. If you appear unprofessional or unreliable or discombobulated, that will undermine your credibility. So if you're caught in a logical fallacy, that will undermine your credibility. So if you don't know relevant information or the language you should use for a particular thing, right, that will undermine your credibility. So those are matters of ethos that don't really rely on shared values so much. I mean, I guess some baseline value of trustworthiness, but they don't really rely on shared values as much as you just being a trustworthy and credible source. So that's the no part of that, relying on shared values. The yes part, I think, is more important. And I would say probably one of the biggest problems I run into when talking to anyone is the shared values. And it's not because other people have a clearly defined alternative value structure to mine. That's not the problem. It's because their value structure is more often than not vague and slapdash. And I'm going to read, I've read this before. I'm going to read it again because I don't think I can read this section enough. I'm going to read, this is a section from Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. By the way, if the name Ayn Rand makes you not want to listen, get the fuck over it. That's your emotional problem. Okay. So, she writes, now some of you may say, as many people do, I never think in such abstract terms. I want to deal with concrete, particular, real-life problems. What do I need philosophy for? My answer is in order to be able to deal with concrete, particular, real-life problems, i.e. in order to be able to live on Earth. You might claim, as most people do, that you've never been influenced by philosophy. I will ask you to check that claim. Have you ever thought or said the following? Don't be so sure. Nobody can be certain of anything. You got that notion from David Hume and many, many others, even though you might have never heard of him. Or, this may be good in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. You got that from Plato. Or, that was a rotten thing to do, but it's only human. Nobody's perfect in this world. I just said that. You got that from Augustine. Or, it may be true for you, but it's not true for me. You got it from William James. Or, I couldn't help it. Nobody can help anything he does. You got that from Hegel. Or, I can't prove it, but I feel that it's true. You got it from Kant. Or, it's logical, but logic has nothing to do with reality. You got it from Kant. Or, it's evil because it's selfish. You got it from Kant. Have you heard the modern activists say, act first, think afterward? They got that from John Dewey. Some people might answer, sure, I've said those things at different times, but I don't have to believe that stuff all the time. It may have been true yesterday, but that's not true today. They got that from Hegel. They might say, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. They got that from a very little mind, Emerson. They might say, but can't one compromise and borrow different ideas from different philosophies according to the expediency of the moment? They got it from Richard Nixon, who got it from William James. Now ask yourself, if you're not interested in abstract ideas, why do you and all men feel compelled to use them? The fact is that abstract ideas are conceptual integrations which subsume an incalculable number of concretes, and that without abstract ideas, you would not be able to deal with concrete, particular real-life problems. You would be in the position of a newborn infant to whom every object is a unique, unprecedented phenomenon. The difference between his mental state and yours lies in the number of conceptual integrations your mind has performed. You have no choice about the necessity to integrate your observations, your experiences, your knowledge into abstract ideas, i.e. into principles. Your only choice is whether these principles are true or false, whether they represent your conscious, rational convictions or a grab bag of notions snatched at random, whose sources, validity, context, and consequences you do not know, notions which, more often than not, you would drop like a hot potato if you knew. We're living in a culture right now in which the majority of people that we come across operate on a value system built from a grab bag of notions snatched at random. That's the number one problem to combat by far when you're trying to convince people, I think. It would be much easier if everyone was like a devout Zoroastrian or something. At least they would have a clear, assuming Zoroastrians have a clear belief system, but at least they'd have like a clear belief system that was thought through, like, oh, this is the thing, right? But that's why I personally find one-on-one discussions. I find that the first thing you need to do, first place you need to steer the conversation is to philosophical principles, right? Because otherwise they're constantly moving the goalposts when it comes to evaluating an argument, and they're not even doing it on purpose usually. It's just like they're just pulling from this random grab bag of contradictory crap, right? So getting to philosophy is usually relatively easy. You can usually just ask stuff like why or what's the goal, and like keep going down that path and you get there. You can also kind of bypass the questions and you can propose something. You can say like, hey, do you believe in the principle of self-ownership? You can say individual sovereignty, but I mean, most people don't. You'd have to explain that. I think self-ownership they get, right? You could ask like, hey, if, like, let's say the conversation about democracy, but is what's right dictated by the 51%? Like, is math ethics? Can the 51% enslave 49%? Right? You can kind of get them to start thinking about some of the fundamental concepts that they're pushing and whether those actually make sense. You can ask about definitions like Socrates does. You can say, well, what's the public good? What do you mean by the public good? And a lot of times people are like, what's the greatest good for the greatest number? So you're like, oh, okay, so slavery is okay if it's a small amount of people that are enslaved, right? Because that's good for the other people, right? Or you could be like, oh, good by whose standards? Who decides what's good for the greatest number? Like, get them to think about some of these concepts that they hold, some of these premises that they hold that are just crap. They just make no sense. They're crap, that are evil, but they just never thought about it. Public good sounds nice. A lot of people, even a lot of people who are liberty-minded will use the term public good. They like, oh, what's in the public good? It's in the public interest. They don't know. They haven't thought about it. They're not trying to be evil. They just haven't thought about it. So getting him to that spot, I think, is the number one goal. Once you do that, actually, if you can just get them to question a really basic, this is the other cool thing about philosophy. If you can get them to question a really basic thing, if you can take someone who's like, democracy is great, and they can leave that conversation going, gee, democracy maybe does kind of, I don't know, gee, what are ethics? Maybe ethics and math aren't the same thing. And like, if you can get them questioning that, man, the implications that will have for their life for years, assuming they continue to kind of stew on that and think on it. I mean, you don't have to convince them of your particular thing right now. That will have massive consequences. Eventually, they'll come around to whatever it was you were arguing about. So that's all I want to say about this topic in general for now, like this, these things. But I'd love to start talking regularly about arguments. You guys are having trouble refuting or arguments you'd like to make, but you have trouble articulating. So start bringing that stuff into chat or into Discord or whatever. I'll do my best to help out. And like I said, when I fail, maybe some of you people in the community can chime in and help strengthen arguments if I'm failing at that. So, none of your business says, what if you mumble incoherently and read whatever is written on the teleprompters? Well, actually, so that's, I mean, obviously that's funny, but also look how many people look for how many people don't react negatively to that. How many people accept that? He's got to have that. Pathos is huge. Like the emotional manipulation is huge, so that like literally the blithering idiot can be the person delivering the message, and they're still like, yeah, that's amazing. All right. Look, sorry for the tech problems. I don't know what to say. I'll figure them out, I guess. No idea what happened. But an enormous thank you to those of you who continue to support us financially. You can join that at unsafespace.com. You get your name in the credits eventually when I get around to it. And in addition to this show, Dangerous Thoughts, your contribution supports a number of different series. Earlier today, we had Rebel Civics with Keith Bissett. I think he ranted about the FBI. I think actually he talked a lot about Ruby Ridge because he was ranting about Ruby Ridge in Discord to me today. I think that's what he ranted about in Rebel Civics and the FBI generally. On Tuesdays, I think every other Tuesday, Alex Maselli does a show called 451 Degrees, which is about censorship. And then on Mondays, we have Narrative Dissonance with Juliet Dillon and me as the co-host. We bring on a panel of journalists or people from outside the mainstream to talk about news. And then tomorrow, every Thursday evening, we have Token Minority Report, hosted by Beverly and Alex, although I think Alex is out tomorrow, so it's just Beverly. That's more of a fun show. I think from what I can tell, you have to be younger because I don't get it. But a lot of younger people like it. It's more pop culture-y. I just don't watch Marvel movies. Gene Ellis says, Carter, most people rebel at the thought of thinking. It makes them angry in my experience. Yeah, because it's hard, right? So thinking is a muscle. And so you get to that point when you're confronted with something that creates discomfort. Right? You've got this choice. Do I confront that discomfort and think further about it, which is doesn't feel good? Or do I push it aside? Do I evade? And I think the more you evade, the weaker your ability to say yes to thinking becomes. And the more you say yes, oh, this is a hard thing, I'll think about it, the easier it is to be like, oh, yeah, this challenges all of my fundamental assumptions. I guess I better think about that. Maybe I'll have to change them, right? That becomes easy the more you do it. But the more that you evade, the more you're kind of stuck in evasion. I think it becomes really difficult and it becomes very painful. And so when you confront someone and and especially if you try and force them, right? And they're trying to evade and they're trying to dodge left and right. And you're like, nope, not that way. Nope, not that way. You can't evade this way. You got to think about it. Man, that really, really, it's really painful and they hate it. So yeah, that's why they get angry, I think. G-Man says you're younger than me, Carter. Are you a big fan of Token Minority Report, G-Man? Which is great if you are. I just, yeah, I'm younger at heart. No, you're younger at heart. Okay. Oh, book club. We have 2 books that we have finally chosen coming up. September 25th. We couldn't find anyone who wanted to do the advocacy for this book because now we usually have an advocate, and the advocate chooses the book and says we should all read it. But Alex and I both agree that we should read The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie because, as you may have known, he was stabbed recently. I think he's going to lose an eye. He was like almost killed. I don't know anything about him. All I know is the Muslims really, really hate him, specifically for that book. And there's a fatwa issued against him years and years ago. I think it's $3 million bounty on his head. And we're not supposed to read him, which is a great reason to read him. So I'm curious as to what it will be like. So that's the next book, September 25th. Go and grab a copy at Amazon, or actually not Amazon if you can avoid Amazon, but somewhere, grab a copy. And if you want to join us, read that. I have no idea what to expect. I have no idea what it's about other than that apparently he is really hated by the Islamic community. Then the book after that is the advocate is Juliet, who is my co-host on Narrative Dissonance. And that book is going to be Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, which also I've never read. So I'm looking forward to that. So we're switching to a couple fiction books the next ones because we've been doing a lot of nonfiction. So we're doing these two next are fiction books. So if you like fiction, the next couple months are good for you. So that's what's going on with book club. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks for dealing with the tech issues. Don't know what to say. I will see you guys on Monday, and Beverly will see you here tomorrow for Token Minority Report. Have a good one.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production is known by the state of California to cause unregulated ideation that may be harmful to bureaucrats. Association with the following individuals or tacos is strictly prohibited. Apropos of nothing, I was just wondering how would you feel about another pandemic? Your president is in full control of his mental faculties. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.